How you doing? Good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. Yep, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. Hey, make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos year-round. Some of them are watchable, some aren't. You can make that determination. Let me know in the comments down below. Is this one watchable? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I'm doing a whole series of schedule previews. I do this every offseason. No, these are not prediction videos. Those come later. I like to look at every team's schedule, compare it to last year's. Is it harder, easier? Where's the non-con? Who you playing in non-con? What about tough conference games? Are they at home this year or are they on the road? Trap games, difficult 2 or 3 game stretches, that type of thing. I've done a couple already. Let's keep it going. Here we go. All right, up today, the Tennessee Vols 2023 football schedule preview. Obligatory reminder, this is not a prediction video. Just looking at schedules. Comparing last year to this year, is this year harder or easier than last year's schedule? What about the non-con games this year versus last year? Is it easier or harder? Conference games, are the key games on the road or are they at home? Are there any stretches where you've got 2 or 3 tough games in a row? What about trap games, rivalry games? Where's the bye week? So here we go. Tennessee Vols. Remember last year, Tennessee had sort of one, quote-unquote big non-con game and 3 kind of nothing games, which is pretty common for a lot of SEC teams. That's the route they take. By big, I mean pretty much any other Power 5 opponent, right? Last year they played at Pitt, which ended up being a tougher game than I thought it would be for Tennessee. That game actually went to overtime. Tennessee wins in the end. Then they played Akron, Ball State, and I believe UT Martin were their other 3 games. So 3 kind of nothing burgers in the Pitt game. This year, if you look at Tennessee's non-con schedule, it follows the same format. They've got 1 Power 5 opponent, 3 kind of nothing games. They play Virginia in a neutral site game in Nashville to kick off the season. They follow that up with a home game against Austin Peay. A couple of weeks later, they host UTSA, the Road Runners. Meep, meep. And then later in the year, UConn. Kind of interesting. Virginia's terrible. So I think playing Virginia in Nashville this season for Tennessee is a much easier game than playing at Pitt on the road early in the season last year. So easier this year on that. When you look at the 3 quote-unquote nothing games, 3 non-Power 5 non-con games for Tennessee. You've got the UConn game and Austin Peay. Those will be no problem. Tennessee will win those. But UTSA is not a pushover. They finished the season ranked last year. Now, Tennessee's way better than UTSA. They should beat them. It's a home game for Tennessee. But it's a tougher group of 5 matchup than any of their 3 group of 5 matchups for last year. I still think overall this non-con schedule's a little bit easier than last year's because you draw Virginia in Nashville, which is in Tennessee, as opposed to having to travel and play on the road at Pitt like you did last year. So that's the non-con kind of in a nutshell. You open with Virginia. We just talked about that. Then Austin Peay at home. Just talked about that. And then the traditional early season matchup, conference matchup against Florida, this time on the road in Gainesville. This was a game that was played in Tennessee last year. A game that Tennessee pretty much controlled the entirety of the game. I'll admit that, but Tennessee had a hard time putting Florida away in last year's game. They kept letting Florida hang around. Tennessee would get up by 14, 17 points, whatever it was. They'd let Florida score, cut it to 7 or 10. Florida kind of maintained kind of that 1 to 2 possession deficit throughout the game. Florida then converted an onside kick towards the end of the game, had a chance to tie it up and win the game. Didn't go well for Florida, ended up losing. But that was at home for Tennessee. This time on the road. So obviously more difficult to play on the road than it is at home. However, Tennessee's a much different team. Forget the players. I'm talking mentally. The mental makeup of the Tennessee Vols football program is totally different today than it was when this Florida game was played last year. You have to remember, when this Florida game was played last year, that was before Tennessee was ranked in the top 10. Before they had beat Alabama, before they had destroyed LSU on the road, before they achieved a number 1 ranking in the first playoff poll. This was sort of Florida or Tennessee's first sort of a big win, I guess you would call it, in a while. Now, Florida ended up not being a very good team last year, but that's not really the point when it comes to Florida versus Tennessee. Tennessee's just had a really hard time dealing with Florida over the last really 20 years. I mean, Florida, Georgia, and Bama, really. So when they beat Florida at home, even though it's easy to look back on that game and go, man, Florida was terrible, Tennessee should have blew them out. Well, should have been way worse than that. Yeah, that's true. But at the time, the mindset of Tennessee, they had a loser's mentality, Tennessee did. It's not trash talking. I've talked about this before. It's very hard for teams to break out of a losing mindset. When you playing a team, or you've been struggling for years and years, and you're playing a team that's kind of beat you over and over and over and over and over again, like Florida has with Tennessee, it becomes increasingly more difficult to beat that opponent. So even though you might look back on Tennessee's season last year, and if you were going to classify their wins from like biggest wins or best wins or most important wins to least important, whatever, you might put Florida at 4 or 5. I might put it closer to 1. Had Tennessee ended up losing that game at home against Florida early in the year, I don't think they would have gone on to have the year they had. It's hard to imagine them losing to Florida and then going on and beating Bama and LSU and all that. It seems like that Florida game early in the season last year was kind of the fork in the road for Tennessee's season. They won the game, and they went on to have a pretty good year. They finished 10-2 for the first time in a lot of people's lifetime. This year, you got to play there. Florida's not in good shape right now. Florida kind of reminds me, this is a Tennessee video, Florida kind of reminds me of where Tennessee has been for a lot of years over the last 15 years. They seem to be sort of stuck in the coaching carousel routine. They've had 3 coaches in a row that I think have lasted only 3 seasons. It didn't go well for Napier in his first year last year. Lots of issues at Florida. Lost 4 of their 5 offensive linemen they got to replace. Quarterback problems. It's at Florida, and I'm not suggesting this will be an easy win for Tennessee, but I do think it's a game where Tennessee will be a significant favorite. And for the first time in a while, I think the majority of college football fans will be expecting Tennessee to win that game. Then you come back home and you play UTSA. Again, this is not a pushover game. Now, I think Tennessee should win, and I think they'll be a significant double-digit favorite. And it's a lot harder for Group of 5 teams to maintain top 25 level football because of recruiting than it is other schools. So even though UTSA was pretty good last year, that's not necessarily a guarantee that they're going to be that this coming season. So we'll see. But it's at home. It's clearly a game Tennessee should win. Although, like I said before, I think that's clearly a tougher game for Tennessee than any of their 3 non-Power 5 non-con games from last season. And then a revenge game at home against South Carolina. South Carolina ruined Tennessee's season last year. There was a possibility that Tennessee could have found their way into the playoffs. Now, I still don't think it would have happened. I think TCU would have still been ranked ahead of Tennessee in that last poll if everything else played out the way it did, except for Tennessee losing to South Carolina. Had Tennessee beat South Carolina, everything else remained the same. But the point is that was a devastating loss for Tennessee late in the year against a team that they had no business losing to. Again, that was on the road. You get them at home this year, revenge factor. South Carolina does have Spencer Rattler coming back, whereas Tennessee, of course, loses Joe Milton and will be playing, or loses Hendon Hooker, and Joe Milton will be the QB. But again, Tennessee's just a better team than Carolina right now, I think. Not to take anything away from that win Carolina had, but it's at home for Tennessee. Tennessee has one of the bigger home field advantages in the SEC, definitely top 5 right now. And home field matters. I mean, I think Tennessee found that out last year when they played at South Carolina. But you get them at home, and it's right before your bye week. Come out of your bye week, and you host Texas A&M. Texas A&M is a conundrum wrapped in a riddle. I do not expect Texas A&M to be as bad as they were last year. in terms of play on the field, coaching, or overall record. They're just too talented of a team, in my opinion, to continue to produce 4 and 5 win teams. Now, can they get over the 7-8 win mark? That's kind of been the hurdle that's been holding them back since they joined the SEC, outside of that one 2020 year in COVID. I don't know about that, but the point is, when you're looking at Texas A&M for this year, I think you can almost throw out last year. I mean, they finally have an offensive coordinator, Jimbo Fisher. It looks like, anyway, is going to give up play calling duties. They brought in Bobby Petrino, everybody's favorite punching bag from a few years ago, to reshape and retool that offense. But from a purely talent perspective, well, I mean, let's just call it like it is. They're more talented than Tennessee. This is why it's made to be such a big deal that Texas A&M didn't make a bowl game last year, or that Texas A&M caps out at 8 wins a year, even in the good years. That's why it's such a big deal, is because they're so talented. They recruit in the top 10 every single year, top 5 a lot of years, number 1 class a couple of years ago, and I know they've lost a lot of those people to the transfer portal, but everybody is losing players to the transfer portal, and then you have to bring players in to replace them. It's just the world we live in. That doesn't mean I think they're capable of beating Tennessee, though. If I had to pick the game right now, which I don't, but if I had to pick it right now, I'd pick Tennessee to win this game at home. I think picking Texas A&M to win this game right now, I think is just silly. Could it happen? Yeah. But I'm not willing to make even come close to predicting that until I see Texas A&M play some games this year. Are they going to be any better? Is the offense really going to be redesigned? Is Jimbo Fisher really going to give up play calling duties to Bobby Petrino? How much of a hands-off approach is Jimbo really going to take with the offense? Is he really going to turn it over to Petrino? How's the defense going to perform? All that. I'll agree that Texas A&M has the talent to be a pretty good team, but they had the talent to be a pretty good team last year, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before. I've got to see them do it at this point before I could predict them to win a game of this magnitude on the road in Neyland Stadium. And then back-to-back road games at Alabama and at Kentucky. Probably the biggest win for Tennessee in 20 years. Beating Alabama at home last year in a thriller, 52-49. Everybody remembers that game, back and forth. Hell of a game by both quarterbacks. Tennessee hits a field goal at the end to win it at home, is what it is. This year, you got to play them there. Totally different animal. Totally different animal. You can't sit around and brag about how hard it is to win at Neyland Stadium without acknowledging that there are other stadiums in the SEC that are also hard to win at. I know Alabama's got to replace their quarterback, and as of right now, it's not looking all that promising. I mean, Ty Simpson's never played. Jalen Mildew has played, and when he did, it didn't look very good. So, on top of that, they lose Jahmyr Gibbs. They lose Will Anderson off the defense. I get all that, but it's there. And Alabama's been a pretty good team at home. Even last year, they had a couple of close calls at home, but they found a way to win them. Kind of like Tennessee found a way to win their home game against Alabama last year. Alabama's 2 losses last year were on the road. Alabama struggled on the road really over the last 3 seasons. But this will be a huge game. This will be a big game on the road at Alabama. Now, Tennessee did win one big road game last year, although I don't think, that was a noon game at LSU. Things got away from LSU early in that game. They weren't able to recover. Tennessee jumped all over them. Maybe that happens at Alabama, but it's a lot harder for me to imagine it happening at Alabama than it was at LSU last year. I think that'll be one of the games of the year. Back-to-back road games. After you play Bama, you got to travel to Kentucky. They lose Will Levis. They bring in Devin Leary from NC State. I think Kentucky might have topped out a couple of years ago around the 8-9 win mark. Just not sure because of the way they recruit or don't recruit. Just not sure they're really ever going to be able to take the next step past being maybe an 8 or 9 win team in good years. You do have to play them there. Thing is, Kentucky over the last 10 years with Mark Stoops is one of the best 10-year runs Kentucky's ever had. It's definitely the best 10-year run they've had in my lifetime, and I'm 44 years old. Even during that run, one of the best 10-year periods in Kentucky history, which occurred during one of the worst 10-year runs in Tennessee history, Tennessee still found a way to beat Kentucky almost every single year. So again, I don't know if I would necessarily classify this as a guaranteed win for Tennessee. I mean, it is a road game against somewhat of a rival, but this is a game Tennessee should win. Last non-con game at home against UConn. Not a good team, one of the worst group of 5 teams in the country. At Missouri, personally, I think it's make or break time for Drinkwitz at Missouri, their head coach. He's been there 3 years, 500 record all 3 years. You just can't tread water like that. It's one thing to tread water at 10-2 over and over and over again. Or hell, even Texas A&M going 8-4 year after year after year after year. You've been there 3 years. You got a 500 record 3 years in a row. That's just not cutting it. That's just not cutting it. They got probably a new quarterback. Brought a transfer in from Miami, Jake Garcia. I'm not very high on Missouri. Again, it's a road game, but Missouri's probably got the second or third smallest home field advantage in all of the SEC, in my opinion. And then you got the Georgia game, and this is what it's really going to come down to for Tennessee. I know the Alabama game is huge every year, but the reality is, as long as we have East and West divisions in the SEC, and this is the last season of East and West divisions in the SEC, in terms of SEC standings and who makes it to Atlanta for the SEC title game and things like that, the Tennessee-Georgia game is just a bigger game than the Tennessee-Bama game. If I were to tell you Tennessee is going to go 11-1 and their one loss can either be to Bama or it can be to Georgia, who would you want their loss to be to as a Tennessee fan? Well, as much as you might hate to say it, you'd want that one loss to be to Alabama. If you lose to Bama but beat Georgia and you're sitting there at 11-1, you're going to the SEC title game in Atlanta. If you beat Bama but lose to Georgia, you're probably not going to the SEC title game because Georgia and Tennessee are both in the East. And, Georgia is, probably going 11-1 or 12-0 based on what happens in this Tennessee game. So I think this is the biggest game of the year for Tennessee this year. I know that's, some Tennessee fans may consider, well, it's a fact. Tennessee and Alabama is a bigger rivalry game than Georgia-Tennessee. It's just a fact. But in terms of how big the game is this year and what it means, standings within the SEC, who ends up in Atlanta for the SEC title game, playoff type stuff, the Tennessee-Georgia game is just a bigger game. And you get them at home. You had to play them there last year. The Tennessee offense didn't appear to be able to handle the crowd. And really, it just never got going. I mean, Tennessee really did nothing good in that game. Really, nothing. It's just I'm not going to beat a dead horse there. 27-13 was the final score. The game was over at the end of the first quarter. I mean, it was just clear Tennessee couldn't do anything. And then you wrap things up with Vandy. I'm not here to hate on Vandy. Yeah, that's an in-state rival for Tennessee. So, you're welcome to hate on Vandy. I don't blame you. I do it with Georgia Tech, even though they're terrible. But you beat Vandy by 50. I mean, what else can you say about Vandy? They try hard, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, there you go. Tennessee schedule 2023. Let me know what y'all think about it. Tennessee fans, I don't do predictions until usually May or June. If you want to tell me what your prediction is, you can, or just tell me, if you had to pick a couple of games maybe that you're a little worried about, 2 or 3 games that you're worried about, what are the 2 or 3 games? Obviously, Georgia and Bama right now look like the biggest games on the schedule, so that's kind of an obvious there. So pick a third game. If you had to pick the third toughest game here, is it at Florida? Is it home against Texas A&M? Probably one of those 2, right? Anyway, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm doing a whole series of these schedule previews. I did Alabama the other day. You can click back a video or 2 and check that out if you want. Doing Tennessee today, and we'll keep them going. All right, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and have a good morning.